Hello, Set Apart Saints. This is David, and I recently published a book called The 70th Week of Daniel 9 Decoded, and I'm making some videos to explain some of the key concepts. As a refresher, from my previous video, I'm going to focus on Daniel 9:25 to 27, which is on your screen, so you can stop the video if you're watching the video and read the verses. If you're listening to the audio, just take time to read those verses. But basically, to recap, the prince is Messiah, and the people are the Jews. So Daniel declared that the 70-week prophecy is for thy people, the Jews. And Messiah is of the tribe of Judah, thus the Jews are his people. We can see in the verses that Messiah the Prince is declared in verse 25, and we see him again in verse 26, and we see his action of confirming the covenant in verse 27. To clarify who Daniel is describing, please watch my video about the people, the prince, and the covenant. Daniel 9:25 declares that the 70 weeks are determined for thy people, the Jews, to finish the transgression of sinning against the Father. Notice that the word determined is used in verses 26 and 27. So the destiny of the Jewish nation and Jerusalem depends on their actions in the 70th week of Daniel. Does the Jewish nation end their rebellion against the Father and accept his promised Messiah? Or do they disobey him and reject Messiah? What they do determines their destiny. When you read Daniel 9:25 to 27, the prophecy seems disorganized from a literary sense until you understand that it has an elegant structure which is used to effectively hide the message from those who don't have eyes to see. It uses a chiastic structure to give two interrelated storylines which are interwoven in the verses. So the first storyline is about the Jews, the city of Jerusalem, and the Jewish nation. And you can see that played out in the red. And it's talking about knowing therefore and understand from the going forth of the command, which came from Persian king Artaxerxes in 457 BC to restore and build Jerusalem. So that's the command that starts the 490 years. The street, the plaza in the city will be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. You go down to the next one in red. It says, the people, the Jews of the prince, Messiah, that shall come shall destroy the city and sanctuary, and the end shall be with the flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. So it's saying the Jews, by continuing in their rebellion against the Father and by delivering Messiah up to be killed, they caused their city and their temple to be desolated. And then verse 27 continues the story. For the overspreading of abominations, the Jews' abominations of continuing to sin, rejecting their promised Messiah, delivering them up to be killed, offering sacrifices in the temple even after Messiah made his one-time atonement for our sins, and even making sacrifices unto Rome in the temple. So that was an abomination to be sure. So for that overspreading of abominations by the Jews, Messiah made the temple and the city desolate. He sent the Roman army to desolate them in 70 AD. The second storyline is about Messiah, who appears in the 7th week of Daniel, who dies in the middle of the 7 years for our sins. So we see that in the purple. So it's saying, therefore, know and understand from this sign, from this command, until Messiah the Prince is 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So the 62 is 62, 7 weeks, it's telling you 69 weeks will pass, and then Messiah will appear. Verse 26 tells us after the 62-week period, Messiah will be cut off, but not for himself. So it's saying that he's cut off not for his sins, but for our sins. And it's telling you again, reinforcing that this happens after the 62-week period. So there's a 7-week period, 62-week period, and a 1-week period. So it's saying after the 62 weeks, which is after the 7 weeks, so after 69 weeks total, again, meaning in the 70th week of Daniel, Messiah is cut off, proving that he appeared in the 7th week of Daniel. Daniel 9:27 picks up the narrative. It says, he, pointing back to Messiah the Prince, Messiah, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. So he's coming to confirm the everlasting covenant to pay for our sins during the week, during the 1 week that's remaining, which is the 70th week of Daniel. And it tells us when. In the midst of the week. That means in the middle of the week, he caused the sacrifice and oblation to cease. That means that his one-time sacrifice ended the need for temple animal sacrifices. So it's telling us right there, in the middle of the 70th week of Daniel, Messiah died. So we know that it's been fulfilled by Messiah. It's not a future 70th week of Daniel. What's amazing is that with this structure you see the flow. You see the back and forth about how it's about the Jews and Jerusalem, and you see how it's about Messiah. So now it makes sense instead of just the text that's mixed together that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Now it makes total sense seeing it this way. The amazing part is that the pinnacle of the structure is Daniel 9:26, and it's saying the Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. What took place in the middle of the 7th week of Daniel, it represents the pinnacle of human history. We see that part of the verse is in verse 26, that part of this whole passage is the highlight of the whole structure. So the structure is all pointing to this one part where Messiah died for our sins. We see in these verses the plain language that the people are the Jews, the prince is Messiah. We know that Messiah was cut off, not for his sin, but for ours. We know that Messiah came to confirm, to ratify the everlasting covenant with his blood as the Passover lamb. We know that Messiah foretold that the Jews would deliver him up to be killed. We read that in the Gospels. We understand that Jerusalem and the temple were desolated in that generation in 70 AD. So we see the consequence, the determined consequence, the war coming against them. We see clear definitions and the fulfillment right here. So we know who the people are. We know who the prince is. We know what the covenant is. My 7th week of Daniel 9 decoded book provides you with a mountain of evidence to see that there's no place in the 70 weeks of Daniel prophecy for the end times or for an antichrist. That's a deception from the enemy. I show you how the people of Messiah the Prince, the Jews, caused the desolation of the temple and the city by their continued rebellion against the Father, by the rejection of Messiah, which resulted in their just punishment. Now, the Jews who believed in Messiah were saved from the coming desolation of Jerusalem as they saw the sign of the abomination of desolation, and they fled to the mountains for protection. So the true Jewish nation, the true nation of Israel, called Holy Jerusalem, was saved. The unbelieving Jews were left lost in their sins, and judgment came upon them during the Jewish-Roman wars of 66 through 70 AD. Hopefully that helps clarify what the 70 weeks of Daniel prophecy is describing, so you can see that it's not about the end times. Knowing the truth helps us be prepared for how the prophecies of Revelation play out in these end times and for Messiah's return. If this lesson helped you, please click on the YouTube thumbs up and post a comment. Keep learning and growing in the way to be an overcomer. Amen.